Live.
All right. So, what do you want to talk about today?
I want to talk about love. I want to talk about why people struggle, especially when they're incredibly successful in other areas of their life and they endlessly struggle with finding someone that they can share that part of their lives with.
Yeah, but with the way I always like to back up from there and to say, like I was talking with a friend today I was talking today on the phone with a friend while I was driving over to the studio. And my first, as I kind of sort of explained what we were embarking on, as he put it about, he's wealthy. And so what he said was, well, that's what hookers are for, and I said, well, that's sort of what we're trying to get out of is the transaction, not that people that are wealthier are employing prostitutes. However, the mentality is that when you're in business, you're highly successful in business, so much of your life is kind of a transaction. So it's really typical and really obvious where the habit of transaction spills over into a real relationship, and why it's just easier to go to Vegas or to just keep it, sort of keep it small and not really learn what it's like to actually be in a loving relationship, which isn't just about a transaction or just about an act. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it makes sense from a deeper level where a lot of these high powered, very successful leaders and executives, they're very precise in their goals. They know what their end game goal is, and they will do whatever it takes to get to that end game goal. And so, I had a client once that said, it's just about the release for me, Tiff. That's how he described relationships. It's about the release. And I was like, well, describe the release. What are you actually talking about here? And for him, it was very literally about the physical release that he got in the act of orgasm. It wasn't about the relationship. It wasn't about any of that dance that actually grows us as a human. It grows us as a soul. Those triggers that you get when you get into the muck and the mire of the actual relationship of working through those things, just like that's what grows a man or a woman in business. It's not all smooth sailing. You have to figure out how to work through the problems or the roadblocks that you come up against when you're building a multi-million-dollar business. That doesn't happen effortlessly.
When someone says it's about the release, then really intimacy or relationship has sort of become a tool for survival or for stress management. But I'm not so sure a release is a relationship that's a stress management exercise.
You're absolutely correct. That's exactly what it is.
So if you back it up, you'd say, well, okay, so if people struggle with love relationships when they're highly successful, primarily because everything's a transaction and relationships equals intimacy equals stress management, then it's a whole complete paradigm shift to imagine actually falling in love or caring for someone beyond the release.
Correct. And I think on some
Nothing wrong with the release, but it's stunted by the transaction. You know what I mean? Does that?
Yeah, well, I don't think that you're able to enjoy the making love process if you're focused on a release. So your process becomes your outcome in everything that you do. And so if your process is can't wait for the kids to be raised and out of the house, you know how much you miss out on. That's like the release that we're referring to here metaphorically is I just want to get to the third base, if you will. I just want to get to the third base and enjoy that. But that's not sustainable. And it's definitely not the best way to go about building an intimate relationship with someone. And so I guess you have to ask yourself and you have to get clear, what is it I actually want?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think about my son, my oldest son, and he was talking about relationships, and he was in a relationship where the person said, well, the girl says, well, I bring the intimacy. And he was saying, but dad, I bring the intimacy too. So that makes it a wash. So what are you bringing beyond the intimacy for the relationship that isn't a wash? That doesn't get washed out by my efforts because I'm bringing the intimacy too. It's not like I'm at a deficit and you're holding the keys, right? So I think that's an interesting thing. Like what two people each person has to bring something.
Yeah, and I also think, one thing that I hear from a lot of people is I don't know how to be romantic. And that was
You
interesting.
personally?
No, I'm personally very romantic.
Okay.
And I've had,
Yeah, I was like,
for
okay.
the most part, I've experienced romantic partners. I was married to a man that was very romantic. And so it was a very new concept for me to imagine a man or a woman, because it's not predominantly one or another. We can't say it's mostly men that feel like this, because there's a lot of incredibly romantic men. So, let me ask you the question: what does romantic mean to you?
Well, I mean, I guess it would be the best is just to tell you what my first thought was. So when you said your ex-husband was incredibly romantic, the first thought was that he is creative, that he thinks of you, thought of you, and what you would enjoy. And then wants there to be an element of surprise there. And he's thought like the perfect evening would be like driving home from this thing and hearing just how amazing that was and feeling like he hit it out of the park, and met the needs of his woman, which means that he was not just centered on his own release, but enjoyed the art of romance that meets the needs of his unique person.
Yeah, and I think that it goes beyond even meeting the needs for. So I'll give you an example. There was a time we went to dinner in Big Sur, and it was our anniversary. And he had called ahead and had an order of flowers delivered to the table, along with a card that he had skipped away from where we were staying and delivered the card and said, "I want this on the table." And so it was just those thoughtful things that I think not only made me feel special, but I do believe that romance makes both the partners feel special. Something I always do even to this day is I pack those little portable candles that have like a lid on it. Every once in a while, TSA likes to stop you because it's an interesting, I guess, chemical or something residue. But I would
Maybe.
travel with them because it creates an experience when you pull it out. Or let's say you're you know going somewhere special and you happen to bring that bottle of wine. They don't know you're bringing it. You bring the bottle of wine and a couple glasses and they're so surprised. They're like, "Yes, that benefits everyone. It's not just for your partner, it's for both of you." And the reason I brought this up is because I think romance is essentially the bedroom for a beautiful, intimate relationship. And if you don't understand how to create a beautiful bedroom, you're going to be sleeping in dirty sheets. Like, that's just how
Well,
it's going to be.
I mean, I do think it's interesting what you are reminding. And certainly, yes, there's a benefit from not only being romantic, but receiving a romantic experience. And I don't think it's a single, like one person or the other that benefits. But it is interesting because the people please aspect sometimes would rob you. If you think about it, it would like maybe even rob you of the romantic experience. Or, for example, if you were doing, you're going to Nepenthes in Big Sur, like hopefully that, like which is amazing. It's like the best, it's like literally the best restaurant on earth. I think the name's changed now, but it's amazing. And, like the last thing, and by the way, as a woman, you would probably know this, but the last thing you would want is to feel like that your special person is just trying to get to the end of the evening. You know what I mean? Not that it's over, but just for the quote unquote release that you had suggested.
Right. And again, I think that's part of enjoying the process of romance without any thought of the end. It's like, hey, even if we never got to the end, this is really fun. This is really enjoyable and it feels good. And so a lot of people, they've learned how to romance someone in a business deal. You have to romance someone in a business deal.
Well, yeah. And I mean, that's who we work with. So, I mean, these are literally people that have learned the art of romance in a business deal, making them feel special, making them feel heard, right? And making sure that there's a win for everyone, right?
It's a great point that you bring up, because I remember working with this gentleman and he's like, "I don't understand." He'd been married for 15 years, a little over 15 years. He's like, "I don't understand. I do everything right. She can spend unlimited amounts of money on the kids. She can go travel with her girlfriends. She can do anything that she wants." And I said, "Okay, let's talk about this for a second." I said, "Let's talk about your money." And he goes, "Okay, what do you want to talk about?" And I said, "Let's talk about how you manage your money. Do you know what your investments are doing?" He goes, "I know exactly what my investments are doing." And I said, "And you know where they're all at, right?" And he goes, "Yes, I know where they're all at." And I said, "You know when they're up? You know when they're down?" He says, "Yes." And I said, "How often do you keep tabs on your wife, on her emotions, and if she's up or if she's down or where she's at or who she's having lunch with or where she's traveling to?" And he goes, "Actually, it's irrelevant to my life." He goes, "I don't pay attention to that. She pays attention to that." And I go, "Okay, and so you want that to thrive even though you're not paying attention to it? You just lost stock, buddy. A whole lot of stock." And it was like this major epiphany for him to wake up to the reality that he did not keep an eye on the litmus of his marriage at all. He had no concept of what was going on with it because he thought the finances would fulfill that role. They didn't.
Yeah, it's kind of like, in business, of course, we always hear that what gets measured, grows. What gets measured, is trackable. What gets measured, metrics matter essentially. And in a relationship, it's like, oh, well, she worries about, for example, like I'll just use an example. Oh, she worries about, how she's doing, and if she's not, she'll let me know. But I think, women are not looking to be with a mind reader, and women also understand that their man is not a mind reader. But I'll take that back, because if you're stuck in high school love 101, I remember those girls, they just wanted to be a mind reader. I think maturity, brings about communication. The folks that we work with, I mean, they're, oftentimes middle-aged people that have been highly successful. They've received all the accolades and the money, and certainly the significance that comes from that. They've moved from uncertainty to certainty in so many different, areas. But the one thing that they're missing is a true caring love relationship that isn't high school based, that isn't based on just a release, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, in a lot of ways, though, it's maturing to that level where you want more, or when you can imagine your life, without, like, when you sell the business, and then what, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of the men and women I work with are probably late 50s, 60s. So they're hitting retirement age and they're realizing that they no longer have to bust their butts in business. And they really are looking for something satisfying in their personal lives. And they're looking at the fact that sometimes a marriage does expire. Like, that's the reality of the situation, is that it doesn't always have a shelf life of 30 or 40 years. So one day you wake up and you say, wow, it just doesn't do it for me anymore. Now, can you find your way back to that space? Sure, if both partners are interested in doing the work, and I do say work in a very serious way, because it's not an easy road. It took you how many years to get to where you're at, to get to the expired state? So let's say it took 15 years for you to get there, raising your kids, you working on business, your wife might have a separate house in Santa Barbara. I've seen that plenty of times where they wind up living in separate states even. And it's because that's what works for the marriage, because it's so scary for somebody to imagine their finances being split, which that's a whole other topic that we can cover on another episode, is how you can let go of that fear and just recognize that there's plenty of it to have more of. And if you want to have the life that you want to have, the experiences you want to have with a lover, you have to let go of what doesn't work. You have to stop drinking the expired milk. That's just the bottom line.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's just so essential. Is just, really just becoming real on how you want it to look down the road, and that might look different than just solving a need, a momentary need.
Well, like an example is a client of mine said he was kind of hitting this interesting stage with his wife, because as they were hitting retirement, she wanted to purchase more horses, which just means less travel. And in his mind, he thought more travel is what I want to do at this age. I can finally travel. I don't have to be stuck to an office. I can go wherever I want. And the love's still there. It's just there's this thing that has to be spoken about, and it's usually not spoken about. People don't take the time to sit down and say, hey, this doesn't work for me. And I see that you're headed this direction. And that's because it's scary. I'm not sure why people are so afraid of speaking their truth and then walking the path that it takes to go down that road. It's like, you want something different than I want. And a perfect example of this is people that have kids where one of them don't actually want kids. It's a disaster. You wind up being raised by nannies. The kids are in daycare because someone doesn't want to raise the kids. I know a little bit about you, and I know you were married to an amazing woman who loved that role. That's what she loved doing. And so I think for a lot of people, they put an expectation on their partner that they're going to enjoy that. And a lot of times they never wanted it. And it's just basic communication, which again is romance. Communicating what you want, communicating what you want in bed, communicating what feels good for you. Do you know there are people that have been married for 20 plus years that have never communicated what they really want in bed? I don't care if it's kinky, if it's rough, if it's softer, if it's harder, if it's deeper, if it's whatever. You still have to communicate that with someone, if not to yourself first. It can't just be a fantasy that you think about every time you touch yourself, but it never actually enters the light of day.
Yeah, but that anyone that has never communicated that doesn't feel comfortable communicating that, and it's not not always just because they don't feel comfortable. It's because there's not an open door for that communication, because they're going to get that furrowed brow, that kind of cross-eyed look of like, what? Like, you, like, whoa, I didn't sign up for that. Like, it's not safe. It doesn't, just because you communicate, in my opinion, doesn't mean that, you get everything that you said you wanted, right? But I do think like a relationship that's safe, you can communicate, but you have to open that door.
Well, and I think that part of it, one of the things that my clients do with me is they play it out. They play it out, and I'll be them, and they act like their wife or their husband, and they say this is how it's going to play out because they know their partner so well, and so we practice and we script how they would respond to that type of communication if somebody is not favorable to what they're saying, because you have to, with anything, you have to have a rough idea of what the other side, what the rebuttal is going to be. Because remember, we're in sales. Everybody is either they're being sold or they're buying. Sell or be sold. You can quote Grant Cardone on that one, because in every interaction, you're either convincing someone to have your beliefs or they're convincing you to have your beliefs. And this gets in the way of a lot of relationships, is you're just constantly trying to sell them, but someone has to buy. To have a great partnership, someone has to buy. And it doesn't have to be the same person, nor should it be the same person every single time that's deciding to buy what you're selling, because that can get ridiculously boring. And then you have all the success and the other person doesn't really. They wind up at a deficit. Not just, I mean, basically it's an emotional deficit. It's not a financial deficit. They're at an emotional deficit because they're wanting to sell, but A, they don't know how to sell. Men and women alike, they don't know how to sell their needs, their wants, and their desires to their partner. And that's what I do with a lot of my one-on-one clients, is I teach them how to sell what it is they want, whether that's in bed, whether that's in life, or whether that's in experiences. Sometimes it's with their family. I mean, your family's been selling you something your whole entire life, and this is how you're supposed to show up. Well, what if one day you wake up and you're like, hey, I'm not buying what you're selling anymore?
Yeah. Have you, I'm hoping you have. Have you watched the movie Is This On? Is This
No.
Thing On?
Uh-uh.
I think it's Will Arnett, and he and his wife are separated. And so he's living like in a, apartment, and he ends up going to this comedy club just because he wanted to drink. And he didn't have the $15 cover. And so it's just a great movie. I want to hear your thoughts on this. So because he didn't have the cover, the only way he could get in is if he did some comedy, and then you get to waive the cover and go into the bar. So he signed up to do comedy. He's never done it before in his life, and he gets up front and he says some funny things about just being married, right? Like, it was funny. He said, like, I'm getting divorced. And he's like, what tipped me off, honestly, is that I am paying a mortgage on a house, but I live in an apartment. That's the real biggie for me. But here's what happened in the movie. So his wife went out on a date, and his wife did not know that he was in comedy, her soon to be ex-husband. And the date happened to be at the comedy club. And then he happened to be headlining for the comedy. And so they sat down, and then, Will Arnett gets, literally like goes up to the front, and she's like, what the hell's happening? That's my soon to be ex-husband. And he does this entire set about divorce. And then he even announces that he's had sex again. And he's like, that's like cool. Like, wow. Like, like he goes, but it's like going, he said, it's like going to an Airbnb. And then, it's like a kitchen's a kitchen, but he's like, but the spatulas are in this drawer instead of this drawer, but you're used to the spatulas being on the right, not the left of the stove. And he goes, so it's like the same, it is a kitchen, but to cook in that kitchen is different. Well, at any rate, his wife, he found out from another comedian that his wife had seen the show. He didn't know that. And so he ran out to the front of the comedy club and he found her. And she looks at him and she says, it was kind of hot. And then they kind of sort of got back together. And when I was watching them get back together, I didn't get through the entire movie. I left about 20 minutes before the movie's over. Pretty typical of me. And they
I know how this is going to play out.
Yeah, it was about 20 minutes. I'm like, I don't really want it to end because they're probably going to screw up the ending or make it not how I want. So I'll check it tomorrow when I'm in a better frame. Not sliding into 11:30 at night watching a movie end wrong. So they were, he was sort of dating her again. He went and picked her up from work, and it took him 47 minutes to drive from his place to hers to pick her up, and so that was sweet. and very romantic, by the way. But I was just looking at this movie and I was thinking, you have to be on the same journey. But here's the thing, and you would say, not every relationship has it like a lifetime shelf life. Now, here's the thing: if you aren't on the same journey, or like Tiff, like you and I have talked about in the past, like if you're only clapping with one hand at some point, like the relationship does not have a collective celebration to it anymore, then yeah, I think it might. I think there's no chance. In this situation with this movie, they just needed to reignite the youthful fun of the relationship that they once had in an adult kind of way. I mean, they had two kids, that kind of thing. So at any rate, it was a really great movie. And now I know you're going to watch it.
I for sure will, and I like the concept of sometimes your spouses change so much that there's a whole portion of their life that you know nothing about, and sometimes it's the sexiest thing that you could reveal is that there's this other side of you, because I know that that's what is so intriguing about when you first start falling in love is that you're just learning, you're fact finding, and they are about you too. So you're getting to reveal cool things about you, and the person that you're with is like, "Ooh, I like that." They like everything. There's hardly anything they don't
Yeah.
like. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. No, you kind of can't screw up early on in the limerence period of time. Yeah.
And I was even thinking about how, when you're starting to fall in love and you get all green lights and you just go, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Like, I just drove down and I got 15 green lights. How did this even happen? And then in business, things just turn to gold for you. You just go, oh, wow, it's working out for me. And I think part of that is the internal feeling that you get when someone supports you and they care about you and they see you in your highest and best light. Now, obviously, that's not because of them, but the witnesser or the watcher does have an impact on you. And so when you're in a relationship where that person is looking at you like you really can't do any wrong and that you're human and they love you despite your humanness, because there is no perfection in being a human. That's the beauty of it, is that we all have these really wild quirks, and that is what we fall in love with. I mean, that's a concept that most people do understand. It's the interesting scar. I dated a guy that had this scar on his forehead, and he was so handsome, and he had this scar, and I remember asking him about the scar, and he said it was from a chainsaw. He was where, and it hit him on the forehead, and I just fell in love with him more based on this scar. Like, he's here, he's alive, and he's so handsome, and he has this really rugged scar from when he was young.
Yeah. It's from a chainsaw.
I mean, I thought it was just sexy. Like, oh my gosh, be still my beating
Which
heart.
it does point out that our uniqueness, not our polished, you know,
Right.
filtered self, but our uniqueness is the best part of us. But when you've filtered and curated your persona, for example, business, and by the way, you're in an environment where everyone sort of is a yes person around you, if you're the owner of that business, that successful business, it is a pivot to be in a relationship with give and take.
Well, for sure, because you're used to everybody agreeing with you because their livelihood depends on them agreeing with you. And you often don't realize that at the time because that's not how you roll, but that's how they roll because they have skin in the game. So they want to make sure that they're still on the payroll, right? So they're going to agree with you no matter what. And that's part of what probably both of our clients, but I know mine for sure, find it incredibly refreshing to have someone essentially slap them in the face with the truth. They just like, it wakes them up to the reality. And they sometimes ask, how come no one has mentioned this to me before? Because it's not some deep concept. It's as simple, it's like someone actually seeing them for the first time. The client that has his secretary order all of his gifts for his wife and his lover and his mistress that he had. You were talking about paying for an apartment and a mortgage. Well, some of my clients pay for an apartment, they pay for a mortgage, and then they pay for an apartment for somebody else. So they have multiple different things that are going out. And you know what I'm saying? You get it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, and it's interesting the way you brought that up because a lot of people hire us to say it how it is rather than to be a yes man. I mean, business people get that. Like I need to surround myself with advisors that are not going to say everything that I want them to say.
Well, and also from a really fascinating BDSM perspective, they're tired of having it soft. And it's soft. People are soft because they pussyfoot around the truth with these particular individuals. And, I think you and I just come from a different land. We've never been like that at any age. This isn't something we
Yeah.
just developed. We've never been like that. We always say it the way it is and the way that we see it. And so people have always been fascinated by our perspectives. And we just turned it into something that we can utilize to help people that really value that trait within us because they can't get it anywhere else. It is expensive and it's exclusive at the end of the day because you have to pay for something like this because you can't find it it's not rare, it's incredibly rare.
Yeah. Yeah. So, a couple questions for you that I know everyone would enjoy. Remind me of your favorite win when it came to working with a highly successful individual and untapping the opportunity for genuine love in their life, working with them to untap that.
Ooh, I love this question. I had a client, I was living in Manhattan Beach in the summers, and this is really quite random. I had found a wallet on the Strand, and I picked it up. I tend to find random things, and I picked it up, and I was excited because I knew there was a reason I must have found this wallet. Well, it turns out it was the wallet of a CEO of a very prominent business in town. And so I took the wallet to the guy, and we start kind of shooting the shit, and he says, what do you do for a living? And I explain it to him, and he says, well, I'd love to meet with you sometime. And I go, okay, great. So he hires me, and I come back to Idaho, which is my home. And we start working together on the phone, and everything sounds great. The way that he describes it, he's married, he's got a couple older grown kids, and he's explaining to me how everything's fine. Well, then it turns out later on down the road, he says it's not fine and they're struggling. And so I said, I need to fly out and see you. We need to spend 48 hours together. I mean, I fly out on a Friday, fly home on a Sunday, and we'll spend all day together. And I just want to see what your modus operandi is. I want to see how you work. He's like, okay. So we wind up going to lunch. I'll remember it forever. We go to lunch and he orders a sandwich. We're downtown LA. He orders a sandwich and he's like, and I want this and I don't want this and I want this on the side. And he had all of these expectations for this sandwich. We have this really cute waitress and she comes out and the tomatoes were still on the sandwich and pretty much everything else was right. Well, he threw a minor little tantrum about the tomatoes. He says, I didn't want those on the sandwich. I wanted them on the side. And so she says, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And in my mind, I'm thinking, how hard is it to just take those tomatoes off? Like, what do you want them to remake the sandwich? Yeah, they messed up, but we're here at lunch hour. It's busy. So she comes back. She gives him the bill. The bill's like $50. He winds up paying with a $50 bill and then tipping her a $100 bill. And this is kind of shocking to me because in my opinion, she did it. I mean, I don't believe she did a terrible job, but the way he was acting was that she didn't fulfill his needs. So I said, okay, you and I do the same thing. Hey, life coaching experience. Boom, let's pause for a second. I said, so what were you thinking tipping her $100? And he goes, well, obviously she needs the help. Clearly, she's just a waitress. And I just want to, maybe it'll pay her power bill or something. And I said, wait, hold up. So you just rated her. You just made her feel about this small. And now you're rewarding her with something that's causing her to feel really uncomfortable because you didn't really enjoy her service. So why would you reward bad behavior? Her behavior wasn't bad, but he was rewarding that behavior. Anyway, I said, is this how you act with your wife? And he was just silent. And I said, is this what you do with your wife? And he says, he goes, yeah, she doesn't respect me. She doesn't. And I go, you really expect that she's going to respect you when you tell her everything she's done wrong? Like the house isn't clean enough, or it's not organized enough, or the party wasn't this way. And he just had this really big moment of clarity. And not only did it shift his whole marriage with understanding this and having someone see it from the outside, but it also changed his whole environment at work because no one ever really respected him at work. And they didn't respect him because he was metaphorically acting the same way with everyone. So no one felt loved and appreciated. No one felt cared for. They felt purely transactional.
So basically, once it was exposed, which it had never been exposed in that way, when he was receptive, so when the student is ready, the teacher arrives, when it was exposed in a way that he could really see the impact of his reaction to her and then the reward that he gave her despite the reaction. So it was sort of a weird manic break someone and then build them up, almost like that show Bar Rescue. I mean, where John Tapper goes in and he like screams and yells, but then at the very end, he's like, you did it. I'm so proud of you. I mean, so it's a break break people down and then have like this hero victory at the end. In a way, that's what was happening. And so you exposed it in a meaningful way. You were a neutral third party in that exposure. You were not tied to him. And you're holding on to the few times that you haven't been chosen and letting that instruct your future. Whereas, and I think we're really good as humans of remembering the negative.
The way that you brought this up is so relevant because, sure, cerebrally, you know you've been chosen, right? But your body still remembers the feeling of not being chosen. So you can argue with the cerebral mind all day long and still not win until you train your body to feel, FEEL, more often than you do feeling like you weren't chosen. So you just remember the feeling of having that experience of love in your life. And sometimes for some of the people I work with, it's not even the experience of love, but the experience of connection, like a spicy, cool, flirtatious connection. It could be with a server, it could be with the barista that just really gets them, just knows their order, just knows what they like, and puts them ahead of the line. That feeling right there is absolute gold for someone that's looking for a romantic, loving relationship that will match that vibration or frequency. That's what it's all about.
Mhm, mhm. I mean, just like here's a really, I mean, it might be seem like a dumb example, but it's a real example. And I think especially for our clients that are highly successful, but you got to dress for success oftentimes. And by dressing for success, you show up differently. And you also are viewing yourself differently because you're being viewed differently. You know what I mean? Like it's this is feeling it in not just a mental way or a cerebral way. This is feeling it in a visual way as well. It's the choice of keeping your car clean. Those, and I mean, you called it at the beginning here, the subtle limiting beliefs that begin that I guess like a frog in hot water show up in our lives, and you get to our age, and then you're like, hold on, this is actually like sort of running the show now.
And
You know
not
what I
like
mean? Like,
government anymore.
and it's actually running the show. Yeah. And
Yeah.
and obviously not working, right? It's definitely not working. I watched this thing on Instagram this morning, and it was showing that I think it was a piranha, and they put the piranha in a fish tank, and then they divided the fish tank by another piece of glass. So the piranha's on one side, and then it's empty. So then they put a bunch of little fish on the other side. So then, of course, the piranha kept on banging in to the glass to try to get the little fish. And he banged in so many times that he broke some of his scales. He was, I don't know if fish bleed, but I think they do.